You are listening to Wickham Sound. I'm Bob Johnson. This is an election special where I'm interviewing the candidates who are standing in the Beaconsfield constituency at the forthcoming general election. Before the news, we heard from the Labour Party candidate Alexa Collins, as well as the independent Dominic Grieve. Now it's time to hear from Zoe Hatch, who is standing for the Green Party.
Well, I grew up in Slough. It's pretty much a sort of working class scenario. My parents, my mum was a stay-at-home mum, and my dad worked at Slough College as a technician. I went to Herschel Grammar School. And I really am thankful actually for growing up in such a multicultural community. It meant that I learned about a lot of different ways of being, a lot of different ways of approaching life, and it allowed me, I guess, to get a good sense of myself, because when you're living in a community with lots of different ways of being, it just allows you to have the freedom to be yourself. And I was really well supported by staff at school in order to do that as well. Yeah, it was great.
Were you interested in green issues when you were at school? Because a lot of people are, if you know what I mean, and sometimes then they go on to develop that interest. Sometimes it falls by the wayside.
I was actually, when I was in the sixth form there, I actually stood as a Green candidate. It was around the 92 election. So we had a mock election, as still happens now, and I was the Green candidate then. Yeah.
And then when you left school, then what happened, and then what did you do eventually for work?
So I had a number of different jobs working in different administrative situations. I went off to university. I was the first person in my family to go off to uni, and then afterwards I worked for a little while for the Labour Party. Actually, I was a parliamentary researcher. I kind of lost my green kind of heart for a little while and decided that what was really important was electability. So I worked for the Labour Party as a parliamentary researcher under Tony Blair and the landslide victory around that, which was a really exciting time to be involved in politics and gave me a really great insight into being in government and the difficult decisions that sometimes have to be made. But I left the party when we went to war with Iraq, and I guess I refound my own heart then and realised that you cannot have winning elections at any cost. You know, there are certain things that you can't compromise on, basically. And that's when I essentially went back to green politics, although I didn't become a member of the party until 2015.
I think it's interesting what you were saying about the 1997 election, because yes, there was a huge feeling of excitement in the country amongst those who had voted for Labour and the change, and then quite quickly the feeling of disillusionment came along. How did that sort of play out for you?
Well, I think I saw, unfortunately, at that time, and I can't speak for what happens in the party now, but at that time there was still a lot of bigotry and a lot of racism. There was still very much a lot of bullying and a lot of people wanting to do one specific thing their way and trying to pressure people into them. And, you know, what I love about being involved in the Green Party is that it's very, very democratic. It really consults its members, and it really wants people to be more involved in the decision-making process and listening to all opinions. And really what we're interested in is not just winning, it's actually finding the right solutions for people and putting those forward to the public. And that's a challenge at the moment, but it feels like a challenge that we're overcoming as our popularity, as you know, is increasing, which is great, really great news.
So how did you end up being the candidate for the Beaconsfield constituency?
I was inspired, as you know, previously we've been chatting to some of the other candidates when you were present as well, and there are 3 candidates now for Beaconsfield that are female, and I was inspired to get involved because in 2015 and in 2017, when I was involved in politics, there were no female candidates, and it really feels like we need more of a female voice in our communities. You can see that women are stepping forward. I guess I felt that if I wanted change to happen, then I had to take some responsibility for that. So I'm lucky enough to have the time to be able to devote to trying to create change in the community, and that means, you know, using my time for politics as well as other projects.
What would you say are the most important issues in Beaconsfield at the moment?
Well, for me, there is only one issue, and that's the climate emergency. I mean, I recognise that there are other important issues, but it really all stems back to climate justice and social justice. And those two things, for me, are inextricably linked. So we've got people living in pockets of poverty and deprivation in what's essentially a very, very rich community. And those, we can't expect culture change around environmental issues unless we have systemic change, and that means that people need to be empowered to make those choices. We've got really exciting ideas like the universal basic income, which basically means that everybody will get to have their own income, and we do away with the current benefit system. So they have a payment weekly. It means that nobody needs to worry about how they're going to feed themselves or whether they need to go to a food bank. And we've got a lot of people using food banks, which is on the increase in our communities, and it's unbelievable to me that we've got that situation at the moment. And when we're living in such a rich constituency and in such a rich nation, essentially. But it seems to me that what's happening is that, although there is a lot of wealth, it's being hived off into very small sectors of the community rather than being shared around. And of course, once we know that, once people have got once they've got a stable environment to live in, then they've, and then they can pay for their basic needs. Then they start to make better choices for themselves and for their families, and then everybody gets lifted up by that, and the whole of society benefits.
This obviously is an election that has been based on Brexit, so some people say, and particularly you're sitting in quite an interesting seat with regards to Brexit and Dominic Grieve. What are your personal views about Brexit?
Personally, I would like to see... I mean, there are many views. I mean, I think the whole situation has been mismanaged right from the outset. It felt very much that it was just a kind of a referendum that was called in order to try and quiet those in the original Leave camp within the Tory party, and it's just been disastrous. We've gone limped, it's an omni-shambles of chaos. We've limped from one bad situation to the next. So we've got the Tories that are divided now. We've got the Labour Party that are divided, and obviously, as a member of the Green Party, I support the idea of a people's vote, not because I want things to happen again and again and again until I get the answer that I want, but because basically we were so misinformed right at the beginning of this process, and we need to go back to the people now that we know what it really, really looks like. We've all seen that. We don't probably need very much more discussion on this because there's been endless discussion, and I recognise that people are exhausted, but it seems like such an important issue that we need to go back to the people. But we need to be really, really clear about the parameters. We need to draw a line under it by knowing what the parameters are for that second referenda, so that we can't go on and on and on, but we're going to be really clear, really boundaried. We're going to let the people decide with the option to remain, and then we need to move on as a country and really focus on, to me, what really matters, which is the environmental concerns and the fact that we're facing a crisis in that particular situation, and all of the other social issues that underlie it.
Can I ask how you voted in the 2016 referendum?
By all means, I voted Remain.
I thought that was probably going to be the answer, but it's always nice to check. Moving on from Brexit, tell us how you felt about the recent protests by Extinction Rebellion.
I was involved in the recent protests with Extinction Rebellion, and I was arrested outside Downing Street on the Monday. I was really honoured to be part of the movement. I've been involved with the movement right from the early stages, and as I've told you already, I've been involved in the environmental movement for 20, 30 years, and we've tried everything. We've tried petitioning, we've tried lobbying our MP, we've tried every means available to us to try and effect change, because we've known that this crisis was looming for at least 30 years. So unfortunately, and with deep regret, the only available course of action that seems open to us is to use our bodies in non-violent direct action, to sit in the road, to hold our government to account, and to show that we will not take any further woeful inaction with regards to this very serious situation. And that's where I found myself. I'm fully in support of Extinction Rebellion's aims to reduce carbon emissions and to tell the truth about this crisis, which unfortunately is something that hasn't happened previously. People just haven't been being honest about how serious the situation is. So that's my obviously very clear feelings about being involved in Exile.
Actually getting arrested, that's quite extreme. What was that like? Did you go along thinking that was going to happen?
It feels like an extreme thing to do, and it is. I've never been arrested before, and it wasn't a decision that I took lightly. I did speak to my family about it beforehand, and it's taken us all a process to get to the point where, unfortunately, for my kids' future, I felt like I wanted to make my voice heard, and this seems to be the only meaningful way to do that. I have to say the police were amazing. They were so supportive. My arresting officer could not speak directly to me about what he thought, but he would speak in hypothetical terms about about his awareness of the climate crisis. Another guy who interviewed me was an environmental scientist at university, and people take my fingerprints were like, we're all behind you. I can't really say this, but we're all behind you at the station. We all think what you're doing is brilliant. So obviously not naming names, but he was, the police understand. The only regret that they have, and I completely recognise this, is that it's stretching their resources. But what I would say is that they're getting political pressure to arrest us all rather than just to allow us to peacefully demonstrate, and that seems to me to be very, very wrong indeed.
Bringing it back to local issues in Beaconsfield, it's quite a rural constituency, or sort of half and half. The Green Beltland is one of those things that people talk about quite a lot. What do you think are the important rural issues in the constituency?
So, obviously the Green Belt is important, and it's important not just because of what it how it looks. I think that's one of the things that a lot of people, first of all, think about. They think about being able to go out and have a nice walk in the woodlands, and we don't want excessive concretisation of our landscape. But for me, it's just also about the fact that nature is not just a nice to have, but it's something that's necessary for our survival. And I guess that's why the local and the personal is political as well as the wider issue. It's really all about interconnectivity. So there's some amazing schemes. I'm particularly connected with the groups in Marlow because I'm part of the Marlow Extinction Rebellion group, and over there they've got some fantastic initiatives through from the Wombles, which are litter picking, all the way through to a woman that's isn't it wonderful? They're great. They just won a sustainability award actually, but they also there's a woman up there who's setting up a social enterprise, a beautiful woman called Laura, and she's basically setting up a zero waste shop. And there's lots of different projects like this in and around the community. There's another zero waste shop in Beaconsfield, and there's people going on climate strike, and we're going to be joining the climate strikers there tomorrow. So I think people are understanding that what we need now is not just individualised local solutions, but joined up thinking around all of these issues. Looking after the nature in our own patch, not just because it's nice, but because it's something that we really need to do to look after for our survival, really.
I should just point out that this is being broadcast actually the following week. So with regards to the climate strike, that will have been last week, but I understand exactly what you mean. We're recording this just for the record on the Thursday, the 28th of November, in case you were wondering. Moving on, how do you feel about the grammar school system that we have in Buckinghamshire?
Well, I find it really regrettable, to be honest. I think that, and I speak as somebody whose daughter goes to Burnham Grammar School, and she has a fantastic time there. We didn't pay for tuition. She pretty much got through that on her own, and with some support from us getting her some books. But I do recognise that pretty much everybody at the school comes from a privileged position in some way or another. They've paid for either resources or they've paid for tuition, and that's not okay. It's not okay to have a two-tier system when essentially what we need to do as a society is to raise everybody up. So when I'm sort of saying that we should not have a grammar school system, I'm not sort of talking about bringing everybody down to the lowest average. I'm talking about raising everybody up and giving everybody the same opportunities, really. Yeah.
We've seen a big rise in the use of food banks and also in hidden homeless in the Beaconsfield constituency. What do you think that should be done to address both of those things?
Well, again, I'm going to go back to the idea of joined up thinking, really, because it's not about sort of pocketing looking at the solutions for these issues in pockets of isolation. It's about looking at a society that is using food banks. It's a society with rising things like knife crime as well, and homelessness, that we need to make sure that the resources are really, really focused where they're needed. people, even in things like the Financial Times, the economists are saying that our country is crying out for investment, and that investment particularly needs to go into social solutions. So we need more housing, but that needs to be built in a sustainable way, and the housing that we do build is got to be much more environmentally friendly than the things that we're building already. And then we need to just make sure that we have adequate provision in order to get good support for people to get off the streets. It's a typical example that people will become homeless, and then they'll get a little bit of support for a little while, and then they'll fall back through the cracks in the system again. So it really needs to have a whole load of joined up thinking, really. And I wonder, what sort of society that we're living in. We're living in a really, really rich country, and we are allowing any level of homelessness. It just seems to, and food banks, people are really suffering, and I feel like it's a statement on all of us, and particularly on our government, that these things are being allowed to happen.
How do you feel about the NHS as an institution / organisation?
Well, we're really lucky to have the NHS, aren't we? It's amazing, and the people really that work in it just need the highest accolade, because they are working under extreme pressure, and really at the moment the only thing that feels like it's holding it together is goodwill of the people that are working there, and goodwill of the people that are accessing the services, and recognising how much pressure they're under. But it needs a vast injection of cash, and that's been sorely lacking for decades, really. And we've seen further degradation of the service that people are able to provide because of the lack of funding.
I'm pretty sure that I know the answer to this question, but I've asked everyone else, so I am going to ask you, how do you feel about the expansion of Heathrow Airport?
100% against it. There's no justification for it whatsoever. It's not just about emissions, and it's not just about moving our flying solution to a different part of the country. We need to stop flying at the level that we are at the moment. Full stop, across the board. We need to take into account our emissions, and we need, as a society, to really start to look at different ways of either getting people around or perhaps transporting ourselves a lot less. The glamorous lifestyle of holidaying 3, 4, 5, 6 times a year is just not okay. And I think that we need to have some sort of fair system so that ordinary working people can still access international travel, but just not as frequently. And then we need to have something called a frequent flyer levy, so that the more you fly, the more you get penalised. That allows everybody to have their fair share, rather than it just being a system where rich, affluent classes can have one tier of travel, and the rest of us have to access some sort of secondary tier. I actually travel to France. If we do go on holiday, we use the Eurostar and travel down to by train to south of France occasionally, and that's beautiful. It's such a relaxing journey. I actually prefer it to air travel. I don't fly anymore, but I have flown previously. It's a much nicer way of getting around.
How do you feel about the HS2 project that sort of has this question mark over it at the moment?
Well, for me, it's not just a question mark. It's got a strike all the way through it. It's just not an okay thing to be doing. We're going to be losing 120 woodlands. I've visited the site in Denham Country Park, which is part of the Beaconsfield constituency, where they're actually going to be destroying it. And I went down just a couple of weeks ago, just before work started there, and it's really moving and beautiful to be there, and then to recognise that all of that is going to be destroyed. So it's an area where there's a chalk stream, which is really valuable for as a natural resource. It's got the oldest ford in Britain, so it's connected to some amazing part of our history as well. And there was when I was there with my friend, who's a HS2 activist, there was a kingfisher that just visited us, which is a really rare thing. I think I've only ever seen a kingfisher once before. It was super peaceful. And all of this is going to be destroyed, and it is just criminal damage at the highest level for essentially a vanity project. There is no need for HS2. It's going to increase the journey or reduce the journey time by a really, really small amount. It's way, way over budget. I don't think that we should just judge the decisions we make on whether it's financially viable or not. We've got to get beyond that. We need to look at really what people need, not just about financial viability, although obviously some costs are important as well. So on every way of measuring this particular project, it gets a big red cross next to it. There's just no viability, there's no justification for it whatsoever, apart from a few people who are going to make a lot of money out of it, and that again is exploiting us, the ordinary person, for the benefit of others to make money. It's just not okay.
I would imagine it's a little bit of a conundrum for the Green Party, in that very much they clearly they want to reduce the amount of cars, they want to reduce the amount of road use, and maybe one way of doing that is to invest in the railways. I completely appreciate what you're saying about HS2. Going forward, if the Greens were in power, how do they address that conundrum?
Well, it's not a conundrum because we've already got the infrastructure. It's really simple. So there's no justification whatsoever. Although it's being sold to us potentially as an environmental project, it's just ridiculous. That's just really just greenwashing. That way where people start to put an environmental sticker on something in order to make it feel like it's viable for other people. But really, we've got this. They've got the infrastructure. Yes, we need to electrify it. We need to look at the way that we power the current rail system so that we use renewable and sustainable energy sources. Then we're not powering using fossil fuels. I completely get that, and that's exactly what the Green Party is part of. The Green Party's Green New Deal, which is looking at all the different changes that we need to make, like the way we heat our houses, better insulation, all of that kind of thing. So we've got all the solutions. There are available to us, whether the Green Party puts it in place or any other party puts it in place. I really don't mind. We just need to deal with this crisis head on. And for me, the Green Party are the only one that are going deeply into the problem enough to really, really solve it. But yeah, of course we need a better investment in our rail systems. It's just that HS2 is not the solution.
Do you support an increase in taxation to increase funding in things like the NHS, our education system and the police?
Of course I do. And as I said to you previously, taxation is not a dirty word, and we are crying out for investment in this country, and there's a number of different ways that can happen. For me, getting rid of those vanity projects is going to bring a whole load of money back into the Treasury, and also, raising taxes but targeting the richest. Did you know, my husband was telling me this the other day, that, the shoe repairing people, Timpson, they're a small family-run business up in Manchester. They paid more corporation tax last year than Amazon. I mean, let's just stop and think about that for the moment. It's just absolutely ridiculous that a multinational company would be paying less than a family-run business that's based up in Manchester. And that's, I guess, where, when we start to look at the solutions to the problems and looking at raising revenue for investment in all of the things that our society needs, we need to go exactly where the money already is. And taxation is not a way of penalising us ordinary people. It's a way of redistributing that wealth and bringing everybody up.
If you were elected and you were able to introduce a private members bill, what would your private members bill be about?
That's a really good question. I think that it would have to be one that focuses on the Green New Deal. I'm sounding like a broken record here, but it is something that I'm really passionate about. That's the single most important issue that we need to address. So we're looking at, how we change the way that we farm and do that much more sustainably. The industrial farming situation in this country at the moment is terrible. We need to look at protection of greenbelt and our environmental rewilding so that we get more natural places for our wildlife. Did you know that there's about 20% of our wildlife now are in danger of going extinct in the next 10 years? That's just such a shocking tragedy. So this private members bill will be all-encompassing, really, and looking at all of the different green actions that we need to take in order to turn this very, very large, very, very cumbersome ship around. But it is possible, and we can turn it around in the right direction.
What do you consider that the role of an MP should be?
It's somebody who is a representative of the people in that particular area, and it's somebody who will work with a conscience and with honesty. So they need to show leadership. They need to listen to their residents, their constituents, and they need to make decisions that will govern the country. So that means taking an overview of the whole of the needs of the country and in relation to the particular area that they're representing, and making the right decisions. I don't think it's something that should be tied up particularly with excessive party politics. I think that, and Greens are always have independent minds. They always have the opportunity to have their own views and to represent themselves. We are unified under a particular manifesto, but we're not as kind of tightly held as other parties, and that means that we don't get so much infighting because people are free to have their own opinions. And when you have a robust debate and discussion, then, and it's not polarized opinions, then we come to the best solutions.
Okay, you've slightly alluded to this already then, but if there was a decision within your party that you disagreed with, but you were being told that you should vote for it, what would you do?
Well, that wouldn't. I think I've just said that, that wouldn't happen. We run on a basis of working things through and coming to the best solutions according to our conscience, according to the things that we've listened to from the constituents, and according to really ultimately what we see from extensive research. It's not just about opinion based. I don't know if you heard about Molly Scott Cato the other day. She was brought up in the European Parliament by a Brexiteer who said, well, what opinions do you base on? Madam, have you got any experience in business? And she said, well, I've been a professor of economics for the last number of decades, and she continues to take advice from other economists. We have all of our policies are rooted in very, very sound research. So yeah, I can't envisage that would be an issue that would arise easily, but if it did, I'd be free to make my own choices.
If you were elected, whereabouts would you live? Would you seek a second home nearer Westminster, or would you continue to live where you live now?
I've got a really, really lovely situation where I live. I live right next door to the railway station that goes straight into Paddington, so I wouldn't need to move. I live in the constituency. I just live in Taplow. I've got 1 foot in each camp really. I've got beautiful woodland and farmland behind me, and with Crossrail coming, I'd get an even faster journey into London. So yeah. I'm ready to go.
And just on the Crossrail then, as we spoke about HS2, do you support the building of Crossrail? I mean, clearly now it's built, so... I
think there are question marks around centralisation and bringing business into London. I'm not sure that's what we need. I think that, if we rolled back the decision-making process, we could possibly have benefited from greater investment in other areas in the country rather than centralising everything around London. I think that there are good things about it. I think we've got electrification of the railway line by us now, which is amazing. And, obviously it will be wonderful when we hook that up to a sustainable energy source. And the engineering, we have to take our hats off to the engineers. It's been a feat of engineering, and we do have fantastic engineers in this country. It's another thing I would just say. We could utilise that amazing brainpower and all of those resources with a bit more investment. We can find loads of new solutions as well to the crisis that's looming.
And you can hear that interview again, along with all of the interviews that we have carried out with the candidates in Beaconsfield on our website, which is wickhamsound.org.uk. Tomorrow evening from 6 p.m, you can hear my interviews with the final 2 candidates who are standing in Beaconsfield. From 6 p.m, I will be speaking to the Conservative candidate, Joy Morrissey, and from 6:30, the Independent candidate, Adam Cleary. And the full list, again, of those who are standing in Beaconsfield is as follows. Adam Cleary, who is an independent, Alexa Collins, who is standing for Labour, Dominic Grieve, who is standing as an independent, Zoe Hatch, who is standing for the Green Party, and Joy Morrissey, who is standing for the Conservatives. The general election is on Thursday, December the 12th, and the polling stations will be open between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m.